feel free to try out the link that's going to appear in the chat box. This is a link for the website Native Land, and this will help you to identify the land of indigenous people from around the world or wherever you might be located. Now, tonight's event, Astro Boy, Anime, and Manga, oh wow, is one in a series of events celebrating UCI Libraries' newest virtual exhibit, From I Ching to Manga, UCI's East Asian collection celebrating 30 years. And this exhibit was curated by UCI Libraries Research Librarian for Asian Studies, Dr. Ying Zhang, and the library's 2019 Korea Foundation intern, Soo-Kim Bae. Established in 1990, the UC Irvine Library's East Asian collection supports research and teaching at UCI, and it serves as the educational and cultural resource to the community. And in just 30 years, the collection has grown from the original 8,000 Chinese books to a total of over 120,000 books, with access to journals, newspapers, and multimedia resources in Chinese, Japanese, and Korean languages, making it one of the fastest growing collections of this kind in the region and the largest East Asian collection in Orange County, California. The exhibit celebrates the collection's growth and evolution. It highlights its treasures and spotlights grants and gifts from our local community and global partners. One such treasure is the anime and manga included in the collection that faculty and students from various academic units, from the School of Humanities to the Claire Trevor School of the Arts, reference in their research. And on the virtual exhibit website, users can click on each category and view items curated for each of these themes. And those themes are on the right-hand side of the screen. So I hope you will visit this virtual exhibit at the URL that is listed in bold at the bottom of this slide. And I should mention that this exhibit was originally scheduled to launch in spring of 2020 before the COVID crisis. And so our team has worked hard to convert this exhibit into a virtual format that can be enjoyed around the world. And so when our doors reopen, whenever that might be, the exhibit will be on display in the Muriel Ansley Reynolds Gallery located in the Langston Library. And I'd like to acknowledge and thank all the staff that made this exhibit and event possible. And now I would like to give a brief intro of our esteemed speaker. John Sisson has been at UCI Libraries for 30 years, serving as the research librarian for biological sciences. He loves biology and popular culture, and he grew up watching Astro Boy in La Cañada, California. He is a third-generation Californian on both sides of his family, and he received his bachelor's degree from University of California at San Diego, his master's degree in biology from University of Maine, and a second master's degree in library and information science from University of Hawaii at Manoa. And so please join me in welcoming John Sisson.
Thank you. We're going to talk a lot about Osamu Tezuka. Behind the mighty atom, or Astro Boy, was Osamu Tezuka. His themes to all his works have always been nature and peace. Without him, Japan's manga and anime industries would not have been the same. It is appropriate that one of the many stories in the East Asian archive is that of his creations. Tezuka was born in 1928 in Japan. His experiences in pre-war and wartime Japan and his love of popular culture led him to creating, over his lifetime, 150,000 pages of manga in more than 500 individual manga titles and more than 70 different animated works during his lifetime. As a child, Tezuka loved to draw and was strongly influenced by cartoons and films that were imported from Europe and the United States before the war. Inspired by these, by the war's end, he had taught himself to draw and had drawn over 3,000 pages before he decided to produce his first major work. His endless creativity and love of manga led in 1947 to his first long-form manga, his landmark title, New Treasure Island. Manga was not new in the 1940s, but Tezuka made bold changes in this art form by expanding its length to as much as 200 pages, different and improved subject matters, and brand new styles. Tezuka's Treasure Island became a bestseller in Japan without any publicity, selling over 400,000 copies and launching Tezuka's fame and career. So let's talk about manga just a little bit. First, how to read manga. We'll read from right to left. So you start on the right-hand side, go down the panels, back up the gutter, and then down the left side. Tezuka's technique was revolutionary for this cinematographic style. This sense of motion as you move from panel to panel, as if you were watching a movie rather than just noticing how you travel from panel to panel. He also brought stylistic changes. One of them was this cinematographic idea of drawing panels like a camera, shooting from behind, coming up in front, a long side panorama. He also changed the way people used captions, creating a loud noise. By drawing the captions different way, we have a loud noise, a distant noise, even a soft noise, all communicated automatically by what you see in the pictures. These really enhance the moods of the scenes he depicted. One would think Tezuka was spending all his time in 1952 creating his masterpiece, Mighty Atom. Instead, at the time, he was sleeping only 6 hours a night, finishing his certification as a physician, and drawing 4 different stories for other manga publishers while he worked. At the time, he was also creating The Art of Rock. In the year 19-something, a new celestial body is discovered in the same orbit as Earth. Crime and Punishment, a manga version of the classic Russian novel, Crime and Punishment. Chief Detective Kenichi, the Boys Detective Street Society Solving Mysteries. And The Devil of the Earth, an anti-war science fiction short story depicting a giant city built under the ground as a shelter from world wars and the conspiracies over its construction. By 1954, his income was the highest for any artist in Japan, and yet only children were reading him. His greatest creation, Mighty Atom, began serialization in April 1952. Known in Japan as The Mighty Atom, or in English as Astro Boy, this allowed young Japanese readers to imagine a better world in the future in post-war Japan, where marvelous things might happen. Atom fought for justice, but also for peace. He was a robot who looked like a schoolboy, leading them into the future. To learn his story, let's ask Osamu Tezuka to tell you himself. He tried to imagine the future, what the future would be like to live in, and to tell this complicated story to children. It starts off with a tragedy. A young boy is driving his car in that far-off year of 2003 and has a terrible auto crash. He's killed in the crash, and his father is desolate. Tobio, his son, is dead, and he decides to recreate him as a robot identical to him. Luckily, his father is the head of the Ministry of Science and is able to create the greatest robot ever created before. In a society full of robots, this will be the world's finest robot. But as he takes Tobio home and lives with him, he feels disappointed in him It's not his son, it's something else. He's so mad at him, he won't grow, he doesn't change, even if he has a good heart, that his father sells him to the circus. He's sold to the robot circus and ends up performing as a young boy robot named Astro. Luckily, Professor Ochanomizu, the head of the Chamanorizo Research Lab, came to see the circus and realized right away that Astro was no ordinary robot. Professor Ochanomizu rescues him from robot slavery and offers to be like a father to him. And under his encouragement, he developed his amazing powers. He learned to fly through the air like a space rocket. He learned to speak 60 languages fluently and to sense whether people were good or bad. He could amplify his hearing 1,000 times and use his eyes as searchlights. His strength was equal to 100,000 horsepower, and he had machine guns in his rear end. The robot, named Tobio, was reborn as the Mighty Atom. Tuzuka created Mighty Atom to be a 21st century reverse Pinocchio, a nearly perfect robot who strove to become more human and emotive and to serve as an interface between man and machine. The Mighty Atom was serialized in Shonen from 1952 to 1968. Amid the skyscrapers, robots, and flying cars of future Tokyo, there were also drawn old rundown houses in the streets of the early 1950s Japan. Tezuka felt at the time that to help children see themselves in this future world by recognizing streets and buildings like where they lived. The 112 chapters of Mighty Atom were collected into 23 volumes. These volumes have sold over 100 million copies worldwide, making it the 10th best-selling manga series of all time. These stories were different from the children's stories you might expect, often tackling deep and complex moral issues. He really felt that he could further peace and goodwill by taking on complicated topics and deep issues. For example, in The Angel of Vietnam, Astro Boy flies to Vietnam to stop them from bombing villages. He teaches children about cyborgs, where parts of a human body have been replaced by robotic devices so that in the future, humans can survive in space, even without spacesuits. He also dealt with issues. Robots were a second-class citizen in Japan, and in America, they were treated even worse. And he reminded people of the injustice of second-class citizens. Here in America, Astro Boy visits a robot graveyard where robots are just tossed in the trash heap and talks about how sad it is that any normal person would weep at such treatment. And in the last story, The Blue Knight, Astro Boy fights against a robot that feels that humans are lazy and ignorant. To save the humans from being destroyed by the robots, Astro Boy sacrifices his life. In the last story, in the last page of Astro Boy, he is destroyed, but his father takes him off to possibly be repaired in the future. Not the story we would have expected for children. Manga was not enough for him. He had a love of animation. As more manga artists appeared and his style was being imitated, he pursued his dream of making animation. He created his first 8mm animated movie in 8th grade. And he was aware that this was the time that we could bring Mighty Atom to an animated series. By 1960, many households in Japan had black and white televisions, and some of them were now even purchasing color TVs. In June 1961, Tuzuka formed Mushi Productions. Mushi Productions was the source of many of the animators, artists, and producers that went on to establish many of the major anime studios throughout Japan. And we can see in this picture, that's his whole company. And down at the bottom, you'll see him in his trademark beret, highlighted with his company. Astro Boy was the first 30-minute weekly animated TV series produced in Japan. And first in the memories of many Japanese children of the time was the theme song. So here is the Mighty Atom theme. Tetsuwan Atomu, Mighty Atom, on its premiere pulled in ratings of almost 25% in Japan. At its height, it was watched by 40% of the Japanese population who had access to televisions. The stories were based on the manga stories, with tragedy, humor, and provocative ideas. And it was produced, 4 seasons of it were produced, 193 episodes. The final episode presented on December 31st, 1966. In it, as in the manga, Atom seemingly perishes by flying into the sun to save the Earth. It was an anime hit. Let's talk about that word anime. Anime is a term derived in Japanese from the English word animation and is used in Japanese to describe all animation, regardless of style or origin. So think of anything that was a cartoon is anime. The show really became a surprise hit and marked the beginnings of a new kind of anime industry. The low franchise fees paid to the studio meant the company needed to come up with a way to drastically cut production costs. They ruthlessly cut the number of drawings, trimmed the number of lines in each image. They worked to make the storylines quicker and devised clever ways of simulating movement, from sound effects to the dialogue. This limited animation became really called anime style. There are less frames drawn, so there's less fluid movement in the animation, unlike the Disney animation that people were used to. Segments of movement are interspersed with segments of stillness. The character runs into a scene, stops to listen, pauses in a listening pose. Scenes where the only movement is that of the character's mouth, or maybe Astro Boy's large eyes. There's also a quick alternation between still images, such as shot, reverse shot sequences. It gives a kind of dynamic feeling to a scene without actually using movement. And a style of movement itself, more like a series of poses rapidly alternated, a character's legs extended, then together, then extended again. But you could get all sorts of strong feelings out of this. So I want you to look a little bit how we use just a few scene changes, backgrounds, and limited dialogue to tell the emotional story. This is from the first episode of Astro Boy broadcast.
お目にかけます。これなる原子力ロボットが高圧電流の中をくぐる。曲がり間違えば大爆発。はい、うまくいきました。動かす。
Not your typical children's cartoon, strong emotion and comedy. Mighty Atom became Astro Boy in America. In March of 1963, Tuzuka went to the United States to meet with NBC Enterprises. They agreed to take 104 of the first 124 episodes and adapt them into an English language version. In America, animation was strictly for children, so they needed to adapt them. These, what they called adjustments for cultural differences. They had to remove references to religion, excessive violence, references to nuclear war, overtly adult imagery, and depictions of most American minorities. He felt very frustrated that all this had to be removed. Even death was transformed to unconsciousness. If Astro Boy knelt over a body, he now had to say, "He's unconscious. Get him to the hospital." It was a success in America too. This is from the third episode. Notice how they transform the images of stories into an American one. Less emotion and more comedy as befitted American children.
Fire! Whoever or whatever you are in there, identify yourself!
I'm Captain Bender.
Captain Bender?
Are you going to arrest me?
No, I have something important to tell you.
I don't believe you. This may be some kind of trick so that you can make me your prisoner.
This is no trick. I have something to tell you.
And why should I believe whatever you tell me? I'm warning you, if you don't leave Mars immediately, I'll blow you and your rocket to smithereens.
Wait, please listen to me. Right now, your daughter Jules is inside our rocket.
That's a lie.
It's true. She's
warned you. Astro, stop him!
No, wait!
Why? We're in danger. He's a traitor, and if we don't stop him, he'll destroy us.
I'm in command of this expedition, so you must obey my orders. And I'm ordering you not to fire at Captain Minter. I don't believe he's a traitor at all. Now get back to work, all of you. Well, what are you waiting for?
We refuse. We refuse to take orders from a robot. From now on, these men will take orders from me, and you're under arrest.
You can't do this, it's mutiny.
Remove this activator, too.
No!
That takes care of him. You see, he's nothing but a robot. And as long as we have his activated tube, he won't be able to cause me any more trouble. Take him away. And lock him in the brig. From now on, remember, I'm in command here. I want every man and machine on the space to leave immediately. We're going to find and destroy the forces of the mutineer Captain Minter.
No, you can't! He's done nothing wrong! Please don't hurt my daddy! Fire!
So now we get to why I'm involved in this exhibit and why you're hearing this talk from me, because this is my Astro Boy. I was one of those kids who watched and loved this Astro Boy growing up at the ages of 4 and 5, and my prized possession was my copy of the Astro Boy theme song record. The lyrics had been changed to something much more space age to sell it. So this part of the East Asian Archive is personal to me. Feel free to sing along.
There you go, Astro Boy, bold adventures you face. Win the race into space, very soon you'll land on the moon. Astro Boy past the stars, on your way out to Mars. Cosmic Ranger, laugh at danger, you will set the pace, Astro Boy. Rocket high through the sky, strange new worlds you will spy. Atom celled, jet propelled, with your searchlight eye flashing by. Astro Boy, there you go. Will you find friend or foe?
What can I do to be like you and become a real Astro Boy? Thank you for that self-indulgence. Another Tuzuka manga that became anime was Janguru Tatai, Jungle Emperor. In 1965, it became Japan's first color anime TV series, and it too was exported to America in 1966 as Kimba the White Lion. It has been thought to have influenced the creation of Disney's The Lion King. How could a relatively obscure anime influence Disney? Well, let's look at the evidence. Both are about African lion cubs growing up. Both cubs' fathers are murdered in the first act. In Lion King, the main villain is Scar, who has a black mane and a scar over his left eye. In Kimba, the main villain is an evil lion named Claw, who has a black mane and a scar in place of his left eye. It seems likely that someone who's familiar with this, when it came to writing a story about a Lion King, they brought back their own childhood memories of a Tuzuka creation. Astro Boy had a couple further animated incarnations. In 1980, it was remade by Tuzuka in color with 52 episodes incorporating many of the old storylines. In 2003, Astro Boy Mighty Atom was created to celebrate the 2003 birthday of Astro Boy in Japan with 50 episodes. In 2009, there was an Astro Boy 3D animated movie. And as recently as 2019, Go Astro Boy, Go Astro Boy Go was started in France, a preschool show about Astro Boy by France's Planet Nemo and Tuzuka Productions. Osamu Tezuka died February 9th, 1989. An editorial in the Asahi newspaper noted, "Foreign visitors to Japan often find it difficult to understand why Japanese people like comics so much. One explanation for the popularity of comics in Japan, however, is that Japan had Tezuka Osamu, whereas other regions did not. Without Dr. Tuzuka, the post-war explosion in comics in Japan would have been inconceivable. We have a wonderful portrait of him and some of his many creations." In 1997, the first stamp, or at least one of the first stamps to ever feature a manga artist or manga work, was created featuring Osamu Tezuka and the Mighty Atom. In 1990, the National Museum of Modern Art in Tokyo held an exhibition of Tezuka's work. This exhibition was the museum's first one ever granted to a cartoonist. And in 1994, his hometown opened the Tuzuka Manga Museum to honor his work. These forms of manga and anime have spread around the world. Scholars now study Osamu Tezuka's role in laying the foundation of Japan's soft power. This influence of Japan throughout the world in its contemporary arts and popular culture. And Mighty Atom himself has not disappeared. He's still alive and well in Japan through his character image being used to sell products and services ranging from toys to bank securities. It's one of the highest grossing manga anime media franchises, grossing in 2003 over $3 billion. For the school children of Japan, they still remember the Mighty Atom, and at school sporting events, they exercised the original Mighty Atom anime theme song. Finally, the Mighty Atom has become a virtual synonym for robots in Japan. Japanese companies have had a unique focus on humanoid robots, these personal robots, and some credit this tradition of humanizing technology to Mighty Atom's place in Japanese popular culture, a desire for human-scaled robots. April 7th, 2003, as I said, was the Mighty Atom's birthday. And in Japan, this was a nationwide celebration, including having the theme song play over the metro system as people went in and off of the subway, and a robot conference called Robodex 2003. At that conference, a recreation of Mighty Atom's birth took place, where Mako Tezuka, Osamu's son, got to meet the Mighty Atom as he came to life. Also at that conference, Honda introduced their Asimo robot. This was one of the first personal robots to appear and really created the feeling in Japan that personal robots would be part of the new industries in Japan and Japan's future. So, is there an Astro Boy in your future? Does that seem possible to you, that a boy-sized robot might be your future companion? Here is an update on the latest Asimo robot as of 2018. The audio in this is a little low, but you'll appreciate seeing your robot friend of the future.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, Osamu.
Hello, Mark. It's nice to see you.
It's nice to see you too, Osamu. I am happy to be here with you today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here in Washington, D.C.
The all-new Osamu received a full model change, equipped with high-response control system and applied mechanisms that are all newly designed. Engineering innovations regarding flexibility and balance control have increased Osamu's agility, both in the upper and lower body. Stability control that was first developed as a key part of making Osamu walk autonomously has seen continuous innovation and has taken another big step forward with this new model.
Thank you for accompanying my adventures. Are there any questions? We will now go on to the questions.
Just want to say thank you, John, so much for your amazing presentation. I feel like we should probably get some Osamos to help people in the library. And so audience members, it's time to submit your questions for either John Sisson or Dr. Ying Zhang, who's the curator for the exhibit. And you can do so by looking at the bottom of your screen. There's a Q&A button that you can select.
So our first question is, John, can you please share your experience with Astro Boy, your first encounter or impression with the Japanese anime as an American boy? What kind of impact did this have on you?
I think that I really grew up as that space age American kid. And so I was so excited to see a boy robot, a boy going into space, a rocket powered boy. I liked the adventures. I drove my parents crazy singing the theme song once they got me the record. I grew up in Lockheed Flint Ridge, right next to JPL. So at the time, many of my friends' fathers were space scientists developing space satellites. So Astro Boy was exactly up my alley.
Great, thank you. One person writes, I would really love to get a hold of the Crime and Punishment manga version. How could I do that? Does the library have copies for lending or are they online?
Yes, the answer is yes, we do have. And how to get it? Perhaps I can just, you can search for this in our library catalog. Let me just share, can I share my screen, Colleen? Yeah,
I think you're set up for
share. Yeah, okay. So here's our library catalog, right? How to get here? If you come here, library home page, and then the library search. So in here, I typed in Crime and Punishment and a comic, and I retrieved 5 records. And this is the one in Japanese though by Tetsuka, and the Crime and the Punishment. There's another one by Shiroyak. I think it's a different. It's a different. But if you click here, Masterpiece Comic, it shows here we do have in the first floor on the basement, because it's oversized basement of Lansing Library. Call number is here. You can get from our Lansing.
That's a different comic.
Yeah,
someone else did the same story.
The same name, but it's by different person. But Tetsuka's punishment, crime, the punishment is held at UCI East Asian Collection. This is a call number. East Asian Collection is on the first floor of Lansing Library. Yeah.
Thank you. Did Osamu Tezuka take any kind of inspiration from the early Disney animated films?
Very, very much so. He was especially fond of Snow White. It was a revolution to him. He really wrote about it at the time and talked all his life about pre-war seeing cartoons and animation from overseas. He never knew animation could be that beautiful. And he especially felt sad at some point he had to compromise with Astro Boy, not being able to animate it as richly as Snow White was. But he felt very strongly influenced by it. When he created Astro Boy, he put English language words throughout it with the hope that he could share this in America at some point. And he was able to sell it to the United States at one point. He also idolized Walt Disney. One of his favorite lifetime memories is getting to meet Walt Disney.
Great. So this is a great segue into our next question. Does American TV still have heavy restrictions on broadcasting material? If not, do you think Astro Boy will be able to air with its original episodes?
That's a tougher question. The world has changed so much. I mean, literally, we have Adult Swim on a cable television that are adult cartoons. Americans for years have thought cartoons were for children, and it's really only been recently in the last 10 years or so that we've had cartoons intended for adults with adult stories. So I think we wouldn't find it shocking at all. It's a question about whether parents would find it shocking if their children saw a robot take off its outer shell to show that its bra was wearing a bra underneath, whether that still would be shocking to American children today.
Great. What are the most direct anime descendants of Atom Boy?
There were a lot of imitators in Japan, and this is where, you know, my level of scholarship, probably the one that's closest out of Japan at the time was Gigantor, where a boy had a remote control for a giant robot. That got also exported to America at one point. Tezuka felt that even though he depicted violence, that anime took a direction that got far too violent and far too bloody in some cases. He wanted children to be inspired, maybe to learn something, maybe even to learn tough lessons. So I'm not sure I could point at something specifically, except the overall idea of telling complicated stories. His manga really set the standard for telling long form stories, stories that ran chapter over chapter and year over year. American comics did not start to do multi-issue storylines for a number of years after he'd done Astro Boy.
Is there any way we can read the Astro Boy manga in English or any of Osamu Tezuka's works in English?
Yes, our resource guide that we have attached to the announcement here, and maybe we'll put the link back in there. One of the first links I discovered on it was that Astro Boy in English is available there on the web. So you can read the whole Astro Boy series by going to that link. Page by page, that's where I got a lot of the scans for my presentation.
All right. Also, what themes or motifs within Astro Boy do you think are still applicable to the modern day?
Well, let's say, personally, I think the compassion that Astro Boy shows, he comes into a situation and he's very aware of suffering. And that's one of these models of the perfect robot that longs to be human. I think that still applies today, that sense of empathy, that he looked at every other robot who was in trouble as someone that maybe he could help. And he looked at every other human that seemed to be in trouble as someone he could help. And I think that's something we can still apply, this idea of, to quote another comic book, with great power also comes great responsibility to be empathic to others.
So this person writes, it was interesting to know how Astro Boy in Japan had emotion, tragedy, and comedy. Now that you are older, do you see more appreciation for the Japanese or American Astro Boy? Do you think that NBC made a good decision focusing more on the comedy, or did it take things away from the original?
When I'm older, I'm aware of the context. And if you watched your way through the Japanese episodes, you would see a direct reflection of the horror of atomic war, the horror of destruction. That was cut out of a lot of the American Astro Boy, but it was very much part of the context. Japan in post-World War II was recovering, and this was really an optimistic vision of the future without forgetting how terrible the past had been. And I think we lost something by not showing the destruction so you could understand how hope can rise out of that extent of destruction.
This is sort of a personal take on watching, but could you, if you limit the frames to be fewer frames with less fluid movement, do you think that boosts emotions, as it might allow our brains to naturally process and fill in the sort of gaps, allowing anime to become a tactful tool for expression?
I think I agree. I aspire to some of the theories when you read comics. What's going on with each panel, that little gutter, is critical to telling a story, that your brain builds bridges between the quiet parts. So as you go from panel to panel, you're building the story in your brain. And I think anime can function that way too. Also, if you notice, there's a lot of silence in there. Again, you have to imagine what's going on. You fill in. And so I think that the imagination is stimulated a little bit by this. It's also the uncanny divide. And some of you may have heard this term about as we get closer and closer to the perfect looking digital human, how it's almost disturbing to us to have something that looks too much like human, but there's still part of us that thinks it doesn't look really human. And I think this style of fewer frames eliminates the uncanny divide effect. We know we're watching a story rather than trying to see something that actually happened. Maybe.
Are there any specific contemporary anime examples that you see Astro Boy's influence in?
I will admit that I am an older person. I do not have time to watch very much anime anymore. And so I don't think I'm qualified to sort of say which things have touched on things. Ying, when exploring this topic in the exhibit, pointed out that Astro Boy is still shown and available in Japan and China and several other places around the world. So it may be timeless, existing at the same time with newer ideas.
How did Mighty Atom influence society in accepting robots in Japan compared to the Terminator's influence on Americans?
Well, that's a very good example, and I think that some of it is the idea of a friendly companion. His big wide eyes evoke that kitten reflex in us. He's a cute robot, and I think that was probably one of Tezuka's intent, to point out that here's something that's cute and small and has 100,000 horsepower and machine guns. That power can be contained in all kinds of packages. And so you see Astro Boy as a helper, and especially a helper against threats that are even beyond what a human could deal with. The Terminator is more sinister and harkens back to sort of the American 1950s of the aliens are among us, that they're going to supplant us, they're going to replace us, they are superior to us, so they're going to take over. In Astro Boy society, I think we're taught that we will grow up and live with robots as our companions, and they will have their development and we'll have ours in parallel, but they will not want to take us over. As in the last Astro Boy manga, where he fought against the robots taking over the weak and puny humans.
Can you speak to Astro Boy's success as an international export? Are there differences between, say, Europe, South America, Asia?
I am not a world expert on Astro Boy. So I probably advise, this is where research is about. I often remind our undergraduates that this is a topic that no one may have researched before, or there may be wonderful books on the topic. But right now, I would suggest that you do your research and look for international influences of Astro Boy. It's because scholars have been writing about him and these influences of Tezuka's creations for a long time.
Has manga and anime evolved because of Astro Boy to be geared more towards teenagers and young adults, or has the target audience changed over time?
I think also,
or maybe both.
Maybe both. My personal view is that Astro Boy Tuzuka was the biggest thing in Japan. You know, he was making more money than any artist in Japan in the 1950s, and no adult had ever heard of him. Here was a major series and an artist that was paying, you know, millions of yen, and no one knew about it, but the children knew about it. And so I think that that pioneering effort of promoting good stories and complex issues really brought manga up, includes the quality of it. So then when people realized they could write for adults and teenagers and lots of different audiences, there already was this template in place that didn't have to just be cheap entertainment. It just didn't have to be one-off stories. One could tell long, complicated stories, and they wouldn't have necessarily be children's stories. I'm a huge fan of Lone Wolf and Cub, basically a 3,000-page manga series about samurais and samurai honor, and a man who has to take his son with him while he deals with this large honor-bound quest. It's both grim and deeply moving how hard it is to have honor in any society. And I think that that's really what this brought to Japan, was the ability to write these longer, more complicated stories. Whether we could prove that influence, I would have to do more reading, but I think I believe that in my heart.
What is the best way to find Astro Boy and other comics or graphic novels at the UCI library?
I can answer this. And again, comes back to the UCI Library Search. If you have the titles or author in mind, you can just enter the title and author in the author in the search box, and then add graphic novel or comic, and combine the search will bring this up. And if you don't have the title or author name in mind, you can just browse here and browse by subject headings. Hold on, like LCSH, and then put graphic novel here. It will bring up all the graphic novels we have in the library.
And we collect heavily in graphic novels. So we have a lot of modern graphic novels. We have a number of digital subscriptions to digital graphic novel sets. And this is taking a while to come up.
Yeah, so lots of here. You can just click and bring the title up.
All right, thanks for that, Ying. In the Japanese anime of Astro Boy, I noticed that they pointed to the US as worse for the rights of robots. Was there a reason to pick the US as being worse versus a vague another country during that age?
I have not read that whole story. I just read a segment of it for that particular slide. Tuzuka was very aware of inequality, and he was very surprised that Americans treated different minorities in different ways. And so I think that it was a way to comment on Japan, because in his Astro Boy society, robots were everywhere, and some people treated robots much worse, sold them to the circus rather than thinking that they cared about where they went or what they did. But he used it as contrast. America, because there was a home of racial prejudice in his mind, was a place where robot treatment was even worse. That is one of those manga that's online, so you could read the story yourself if you wanted later on.
So this is kind of a fun question. Anime Throwdown, Astro Boy versus Space Battleship Yamato. Who wins?
I like that. There's some comic geek out there. I think that the Battleship Yamato probably would take Astro Boy, but as we've seen in some of those movies, if he's too small a target, maybe the guns can never hit him, that he can cause enough damage no matter how fast they work, no matter how accurately they shoot, because he's a small but powerful target. So I would say that the battleship would win ultimately, but not without taking very heavy damage.
Who had more influence, Astro Boy, in culture, or Mega Man?
I think we all cling to the stories of our childhood, that golden age. So Astro Boy sticks in my mind. I did not read Mega Man when I was 6 and 7 and 8 or hear about his adventures. So I have to admit that I can't talk about which one is more important. I think in some ways Mega Man for a generation was more important because these were the stories of their childhood. These were the stories that excited them. These were the stories that gave them something new. Like in the last question, some of those things for my children, I think that, you know, the idea of robots that come together to battle villains may stick in their minds as these are the most powerful robots. I think every generation experiences its own heroes, and you can't always compare them.
All right, and we have time for one more question. Was Astro Boy printed in weekly or monthly chapters for readers at the time, or was it printed in volume format?
It was printed weekly. Lots and lots of individual chapters. The manga magazines usually came out weekly. You go down to the newsstand and there were multiple manga. Most of them had these ongoing storylines in them at the time. So you would pick out the ones that had the stories you like. Or maybe you would have to go back to the used manga store to find the issues you missed. So very much like comics, people could read the story weekly if they got to the store in time and things weren't sold out, but back issues were also popular and also traded among kids, from what I hear.
So thank you all for joining us today. The recording of John's amazing presentation and the Q&A with John and Ying will be posted on the UCI Libraries YouTube channel, but we'll be sending you all an email, a follow-up email with a link to that. John mentioned there's a resource guide on the library collections by Osamu Tezuka and about him. And that resource guide with the link will also be in the follow-up email, but I believe it's also posted in the chat if you like. And I want to encourage you to visit and look at this virtual exhibit on the East Asian collection that Ying has curated, and you can find it. It's the link for it is at the bottom of the screen in bold. We'd also like you to join us for a series of free events related to the East Asian Collection exhibit. The next event is an I Ching demonstration called Working with Magical Symbols in Ancient Divination, and it occurs on Monday, February 8th from 6:30 to 7:30. And if you liked Astro Boy, please join us for the South Korea's Webtooniverse and the Digital Comic Revolution on Tuesday, March 9th from 5 to 6. And we'll also have a special manga drawing event on Wednesday, April 14th from 5 to 6. So you can learn more and register for these events at the link that's listed at the bottom of this slide and also in the chat. And if you would like to support the library's initiatives and public programs like the one that you've just attended, please consider becoming a member of the UCI Libraries Gateway Society. And we can include the link to that as well in the chat. So please join me in a final thank you to our speakers and curator. And I want to thank you all for coming, and have a nice evening.